Iraqi President Saddam Hussein might never have been caught by the Americans if he hadn't had a fondness for an Iraqi dish called mazgoof. For 32 weeks, the U.S. Army tried every possible tactic, but there was no trace of the former Iraqi president, Saddam Hussein. Not only was the U.S. military working around the clock on this mission, but also involved were U.S. Special Forces, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, and the FBI. Thousands of personnel from these agencies were searching for one man, Saddam Hussein. Why was America so threatened by this one man? And ultimately, how did they manage to find Saddam Hussein hidden 6 feet underground in a concealed grave? Welcome once again, viewers. This story begins after the 9/11 attacks in the United States, when Al-Qaeda struck New York and Washington, D.C. The whole world witnessed America's fury. At that time, U.S. President George Bush decided that anyone who supported terrorism would be targeted, even though Saddam Hussein, then the dictator of Iraq, was not directly involved in the 9/11 attacks. America believed that he was indirectly supporting various terrorist groups. However, this accusation alone wasn't enough to justify a direct attack on Iraq. It was clear that the U.S. wanted to end Saddam Hussein's hold on Iraq, a grip he had maintained for 24 years in various roles of power, and so America moved toward ending Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq. To eliminate Saddam Hussein and justify attacking Iraq, the U.S. needed a solid reason. So, America began claiming that Saddam Hussein was hiding weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, in Iraq, specifically nuclear weapons. Based on this claim, the U.S. launched an attack on Iraq in March 2003. In this operation, the U.S. was supported by military forces from the UK, Australia, and Poland. Together, they advanced and reached Iraq's capital, Baghdad, in just 3 weeks. On the very first day of the invasion, President Saddam Hussein disappeared without a trace. When American troops entered Baghdad, they found no sign of Saddam Hussein. After capturing Baghdad with tanks and troops, the U.S. effectively toppled Saddam Hussein's 24-year-long rule. At the iconic Firdos Square, American troops famously pulled down Saddam Hussein's statue in a symbolic gesture of victory. But while the statue had fallen, capturing the real Saddam Hussein was not going to be that easy. Now, finding Saddam and his top government officials became the top priority for the U.S. military. Every soldier was given full authority. If they spotted Saddam or any of his 51 officials, they were to capture them dead or alive. No questions asked. There were a total of 52 people on the U.S. military's most wanted a list. To help every soldier remember these faces, the U.S. printed special playing cards with the faces of Saddam Hussein and his 51 top officials, one on each card, matching the 52 cards in a standard deck. This way, even when soldiers played cards in their free time, they would repeatedly see the faces of their targets and commit them to memory. Over the next several months, the U.S. military searched every inch of Iraq. They raided homes, questioned relatives, and investigated shops, colleges, mosques. Nothing was left unchecked. They only knew one thing. The only thing the U.S. military knew for sure was that Saddam Hussein was somewhere in Iraq. But where exactly? No one knew. Months passed, but there was still no trace of Saddam or his 2 sons. Eventually, the U.S. announced a massive reward for any information on Saddam Hussein or his sons. A total of $55 million was offered, $25 million for Saddam and $15 million each for his sons, Uday and Qusay. Many people in Iraq were already against Saddam Hussein, and the U.S. believed that, even if just for the sake of money, someone would eventually come forward with valuable information. And that's exactly what happened. One man walked into a U.S. military base and claimed that Saddam Hussein's sons, Uday and Qusay, were hiding in his house. At first, no one believed him, but when U.S. forces surrounded the house, they discovered that the claim was indeed true. Uday and Qusay were inside. They refused to surrender peacefully, as they were heavily armed. After multiple attempts to get them to come out failed, the US military launched a missile strike on the house. When soldiers entered the destroyed house, they found the dead bodies of both Uday and Qusay. This meant that the last solid lead to finding Saddam Hussein was now gone, but the US military refused to consider this a defeat. Meanwhile, many of Hussein's associates were found and arrested alive, but no information could be extracted from any of them. 4 months had now passed, and the situation had reached a point where the US military began to suspect that perhaps Saddam Hussein had died in one of the attacks. With this belief, the US military began to reduce its efforts. Neither any military operations nor intelligence reports were giving any indication that Saddam Hussein was still alive, but during this time, an audio tape changed the entire plot. It was a tape of Saddam Hussein expressing grief over the death of his 2 sons. This audio tape meant that Saddam Hussein was still alive. The US renewed its efforts to find him and increased the reward on his head from $25 million to $30 million. Along with that, they also promised US citizenship to anyone who would provide useful information. Tempted by such a large reward, people started trying their luck. Iraqis began giving all kinds of random information, hoping that if Saddam Hussein was caught based on it, they would receive the reward. However, this actually made the job harder for the US. Almost all the people printed on the deck of cards had already been captured. Only a few remained, including Saddam Hussein. During this time, a sergeant from the Defense Intelligence Agency, Eric Maddox, started thinking in a direction completely different from the deck of cards. He noticed that the people listed as most wanted were mostly top officials from Saddam Hussein's government. Their power came from Saddam Hussein, not the other way around. At this point, the people Saddam Hussein would need the most were his bodyguards. Saddam Hussein's bodyguards were divided into 3 categories. One group protected his palace. The second would go to a location in advance to secure it. The third category of Saddam Hussein's bodyguards were those who stayed with him at all times. At this moment, Saddam likely needed these guards the most. Eric Maddox decided to look for them and went to Saddam Hussein's hometown, Tikrit. There, he interrogated the son of Saddam's bodyguard, Mohammed Ibrahim Omar. However, the bodyguard himself was missing. Then Maddox met an old servant of Saddam Hussein. While the servant didn't provide any major leads, he did mention that Saddam Hussein loved a dish called masgouf, which is made from fish and is popular in Iraq. Maddox remembered that during the interrogation, the son of Mohammed Ibrahim Omar had mentioned that his father loved fishing and owned a fish farm located in a town called Samara. When Maddox reached the fish farm, Mohammed Ibrahim Omar wasn't there, but 2 fishermen were present. These fishermen were not directly connected to Omar, but one of them turned out to be a cousin of an Iraqi guerrilla fighter. To give some context, after Saddam Hussein was overthrown, his close military officials had launched a guerrilla war against the American military. It was believed that these guerrilla fighters were acting on the orders of Mohammed Ibrahim Omar. Saddam's most trusted bodyguard, the fisherman, also mentioned an uncle whose house was in Baghdad. Maddox, along with his team, surrounded the house in hopes of finding some useful information. Surprisingly, Mohammed Ibrahim Omar was hiding there. Mohammed Ibrahim Omar was Saddam Hussein's personal bodyguard. He used to prepare and send the masgouf fish dish to Saddam from his fish farm. At the time, he was leading the guerrilla war against the American military and was believed to be the only person who knew Saddam Hussein's actual location. Upon arrest, Omar initially refused to reveal anything, but when Maddox interrogated him and convinced him that he and his family would be granted US citizenship, he finally began to talk. Ibrahim revealed that Saddam Hussein was hiding in a town called Ad-Dor. Based on his information, US troops began searching the town. There, on the banks of the Tigris River, they found 2 farmhouses, but both were empty. At that moment, Mohammed Ibrahim Omar, who was with the troops, pointed toward the ground where a rope was lying. The rope was very long and extended underground, leading to a distant spider hole. The entrance of this spider hole was sealed with a piece of styrofoam. When the entrance was opened, nothing was visible inside except darkness. Just as a soldier was about to throw a hand grenade into the hole, two hands suddenly appeared from within. It was a man with a long beard who said, "My name is Saddam Hussein, and I am the president of Iraq." The American army had successfully captured Saddam Hussein alive. After 32 weeks of relentless efforts, Eric Maddox's determination had finally paid off. Later analysis showed that if Maddox had not discovered Saddam Hussein's love for the dish Masgouf, he might never have reached this point. Eventually, the main accusation for which Iraq was invaded, that Saddam Hussein was hiding weapons of mass destruction, turned out to be false. Nothing was ever found. And even American President George W. Bush confirmed that they didn't find anything.
लाइक करें।